It was at my promotion party when my dad told me I didn't deserve the success I had. Instead, he said my younger brother, Dylan, did. I smiled, raised my glass for a toast, and calmly said, "Cool. Then he can pay your bills too." You could hear a pin drop. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent my whole life supporting my family, but now, they were treating Dylan like he could do no wrong while I was the one left to pick up the pieces. Hey, Reddit. So here's a story about the absolute dumpster fire that was my family dynamic. It's still wild to think I put up with their BS for so long. But I finally reached my breaking point. Let me start from the beginning, so you can understand what I was dealing with. I'm Mike, 32, and I've been working my butt off as a landscaper since I was 19. I started at the bottom, just mowing lawns in the scorching heat, and now, I run multiple crews for a high-end residential landscaping company. It pays well. Comes with tons of responsibility, and I've had actual career growth. But none of that mattered to my parents. They never saw it that way. My parents have always treated Dylan like he was God's gift to humanity. He's 30, 2 years younger than me, and he's never held down a job for more than 6 months. But somehow, in their eyes, he was always exploring his options, while I was settling for a blue-collar job. My dad's an old-school construction foreman, who's been with the same company for 30-plus years. My mom works hospital billing, and while we're solidly middle class, they act like royalty when it comes to Dylan. This entitlement was there from the start, way earlier than I realized. For example, when I was 14, I saved up for months working at the local grocery store, bagging groceries, just so I could buy this sick mountain bike. The moment my dad saw it, he said, "Hope you're not planning to get it muddy. You paid good money for that." The very next weekend, Dylan took it without asking, crashed it into a ditch, bent the frame, and scratched it all up. When I flipped out, my dad said, "It's just a bike, Mike. Don't be so materialistic. Your brother could have been hurt." The worst part, Dylan got his first bike as a surprise gift for improving his attitude after being suspended from school for fighting. Fast forward to senior year. I got accepted to the state university with a partial scholarship, which was amazing until I saw the remaining costs. I asked my parents if they could help with housing, since they were always preaching about the importance of education. My dad literally laughed and said, "You've got 2 hands and a strong back. Figure it out." So I did. I worked landscaping all summer, saved up, and ultimately decided on community college while working full-time. It was a practical decision that made financial sense. But my parents acted like I had announced I was joining a cult. Community college isn't a real college. My mom sighed, like I had just crushed her dreams. I guess not everyone has university potential. Meanwhile, Dylan graduated high school by the skin of his teeth. His big plan: take a gap year. Translation: play video games in the basement and work maybe 15 hours a week at the mall. My parents treated this like it was some grand journey of self-discovery. Dylan's really figuring out his path. Dad would say, proudly, to relatives, he's not rushing into anything. When I came home from 12-hour days between school and work, Dylan would be sprawled on the couch, surrounded by snack wrappers, playing PlayStation, sometimes with a girl I'd never seen before, sometimes with shady-looking dudes. And my parents, they said nothing. There was also the time I asked for help with community college tuition, $800 for a semester of landscaping design classes. My dad told me to figure it out because that's what men do. Meanwhile, they paid for Dylan's entire first year at state, which he flunked out of after partying nonstop. Their response: college isn't for everyone. He's just too creative for structured learning. My buddy Alex, who I've known since high school, kept telling me how messed up this was. "Dude, your parents act like they owe Dylan everything, and you owe them," he'd say. I'd brush it off with, "That's just how family is." But deep down, I knew he was right. Things got even worse when I was 25. Dylan borrowed my credit card to buy concert tickets for himself and his friends, $760 worth. When I confronted him, at a family dinner, my parents acted like I was being unreasonable for wanting to be paid back. He wanted to treat his friends to a nice experience. Mom said, "You make good money now. What's the big deal?" Dad added, "It's not like you have a family to support." Dylan just smirked the whole time. "I'll pay you back when I get my tax return," he said. He never did. What they didn't know was that I was saving for a certification program that would bump me up to supervisor level at work. That $760 meant delaying my career advancement by almost 6 months. When I finally got certified, paying out of pocket by picking up extra weekend shifts, my parents didn't even acknowledge it. But when Dylan got hired at a bar, they gave him a congratulations card with $200 inside. He quit 3 weeks later. When I got my first promotion to crew leader at 24, my parents didn't even show up to the small celebration I had at a local pizza place. "It's just landscaping," Dad said. "Call us when you get a real career." But when Dylan became head bartender at a dive bar, which basically meant he was the only one who could make a martini, they took him out to a fancy dinner and posted about how proud they were on Facebook. The difference was clear. Mom would share every single one of Dylan's Instagram posts, no matter how ridiculous. My handsome boy enjoying his weekend, she'd write under a picture of him flexing in a club bathroom. Meanwhile, when I posted photos of a major landscaping project I designed and managed, complete with water features and custom stonework, crickets. Not a like. Not a share on nothing. On my 30th birthday, Mom sent me a $25 gift card to Applebee's. For Dylan's 28th, they surprised him with a weekend trip to Vegas and gave him $500 spending money. When I pointed out the disparity, Mom said Dylan needed a break after his breakup. He'd been dating the girl for 2 months. Speaking of relationships, they sabotaged every one I ever had. When I brought home my college girlfriend, Caddy, Mom spent the entire dinner talking about how some women just aren't nurturing enough to make good wives. When I dated Rachel, who was a dental hygienist, Dad asked her if she was the gold-digging type right to her face. But it wasn't until I started dating Cammie, this smoking hot environmental science teacher, who actually respected my work, that things hit the fan. The first time I brought her to a family dinner, Dylan spent the whole night trying to flirt with her. He told her I was still hung up on my ex, which was a complete lie, and that she could do better than a dirt guy. My parents, they laughed it off. "Dylan's always been such a charmer with the ladies," Mom said proudly, while Dad nodded like his son hitting on his brother's girlfriend was some kind of achievement. Cammie was furious on the car ride home. "Your brother is a total creep, and your parents just enable it," she said. I couldn't argue with her, she was right. For years, the pattern continued. Dylan would screw up, my parents would bail him out, I would succeed, and they'd minimize it or ignore it completely. It was like living in a bizarre parallel universe, where the rules were completely different depending on which son you were. The tension had been building for years, but nothing had prepared me for the final straw the moment everything shifted. It came when I finally saved enough money for my first new-ish vehicle. A Toyota Tacoma. It wasn't fancy, just a 3-year-old truck with low mileage, but to me, it was everything. It was the first time in my life I had bought something nice without asking for help. I was proud of that truck. It represented everything I had worked for. All the years of long hours and sacrifices. I was at my parents' house for one of our obligatory Sunday dinners, still trying to keep the peace back then. Dylan showed up already half drunk. I could tell he'd been drinking for a while. As soon as he laid eyes on my truck, I saw the jealousy in his expression. He made a few snide comments about how the truck was compensating for something, but I tried to ignore it. After dinner, I stepped outside for a smoke, needing some air, but as I reached the driveway, I noticed something wasn't right. My truck was gone. My keys weren't by the door anymore. Panic started creeping in, but I held it together. I texted Dylan. Called him nothing. 2 hours passed. And I was about to call the cops when I saw him pull up. Music blasting from the truck. Empty energy drink cans rolling around inside. He staggered out of the truck, laughing. His speech slurred. "You borrowed your ride to pick up Stacy," he slurred, tossing my keys at me. "She wanted to see if the back seat was as roomy as it looks," he added, laughing as though it were all just a joke. I was furious. That truck was my hard-earned achievement, and now it had a huge scratch down the driver's side, a dent in the bumper, and smelled like cheap perfume. I could barely breathe through the anger rising in my chest. I followed him into the house, confronting him in front of my parents. The reaction was not what I expected. Dad shrugged it off, saying, "Don't be so dramatic, Mike, it's just a scratch," and Mom chimed in, "I'm sure Dylan will help pay for the repairs, won't you?" Dylan didn't even budge from the couch. He changed the channel and said, "It's already got scratches, probably trying to scam me into paying for your crappy driving. Besides, what's the big deal? It's just a truck. Not like you've got anything better to spend money on." That was it. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I snapped. "You took my truck without permission. That's theft. You damaged it while driving impaired, that's a crime. And you're sitting here defending him." I turned to my parents. "You're defending him again." Dad got up, getting in my face. "Don't you dare use that tone in my house. Dylan made a mistake. You need to calm down." "A mistake?" I said, my voice rising. "He stole my truck. He damaged my property. And you're acting like I'm the problem." Mom started crying her go-to move whenever she was losing an argument. "Why are you always so hard on your brother? He's going through a tough time right now. I looked her dead in the eye. He's always going through a tough time, and I'm always expected to just deal with it. Dylan, still sprawled on the couch, just smirked. Not my fault you're so uptight. Bro, it's just a truck. Chill. That was it. I was done. I turned to Dylan and said, "You have 30 days to pay for the damages or I'm filing a police report for theft and property damage." Dad exploded. "You will not file a police report against your brother. That is not how this family handles things." I looked at him, completely done. Then how does this family handle things? Dad. Because from where I'm standing, Dylan gets away with literal crimes, and I get lectured for being upset about it. I walked out, and that night, I blocked Dylan's number. I told my parents I was done with him until he paid for the damages and apologized. Their response: "You've always been too sensitive. Dylan's going through a rough patch right now." They spent the next few months trying to make me apologize. Dad would call with things like, "Your mother's upset about this family rift you've created." Mom would text me pictures of Dylan at family events, with captions like, "Someone's missing," or "If only everyone was here." Not once did they actually hold Dylan accountable. Not once did they acknowledge that he was in the wrong. It was always about how I needed to be the bigger person and let it go for the sake of family harmony. The turning point came about 6 months after the truck incident. I had been busting my butt, taking on extra projects, coming in early, staying late. My boss, Kyle, noticed, and he bumped me up to head manager for all North County projects. The promotion came with a company truck, full benefits, and a salary bump. For the first time in my life, I felt like my hard work was being recognized. I decided to celebrate by throwing a party at a brew pub downtown. I reserved the back patio, ordered food, and even hired a local musician to play. I invited my parents, but made it crystal clear that Dylan wasn't welcome. Mom tried to guilt me. "He's still your brother. Family should stick together." Dad was more direct. "You need to grow up and get over this childish grudge. It's embarrassing for everyone." When I stood firm, Dad hit me with, "Fine, but don't expect us to choose sides in this little tantrum of yours." The night of the party, everything went down exactly as I expected. My work buddies, friends from softball, and even Dylan's wife, Casey, showed up without him. Cammy was there too, looking amazing and genuinely proud of me. But Dad showed up an hour late, already disheveled, wearing a stained Steelers jersey, like he couldn't be bothered to change for his son's achievement. Mom at least tried to look happy, but she kept checking her phone the whole time. Dad made loud, pointed comments throughout the night. Every time Kyle or one of my coworkers congratulated me, Dad would jump in with something like, "Dylan could have been a landscape architect if he wanted to. He just has bigger ambitions." At one point, Kyle was showing everyone before and after photos of a project I had designed and managed, this gorgeous terrace garden, with native plants and a waterfall. My dad glanced at it for 2 seconds before saying, "Looks like a bunch of plants to me." Not exactly rocket science. My coworker Damon, who had no idea about my family dynamic, pulled me aside and asked, "Dude, what's up with your dad? Why is he being such a jerk at your party?" I just shrugged and said, "That's just him. Don't worry about it." But inside, I was fuming. Then Kyle made this really nice toast about how I had earned the promotion through consistent hard work, reliability, and exceptional client management skills. He even mentioned how clients specifically requested me for their projects, and how the company was lucky to have me. That's when Dad stood up, interrupting Kyle mid-sentence. He announced to the whole patio, "Must be nice getting promotions for just showing up and pushing a lawnmower. Not like you're out there building actual structures like real men. Your brother would have run circles around this landscaping stuff if he wanted to. But he's always aimed higher. Shame you couldn't even invite your own blood to your little party. Some son you turned out to be." The whole place went dead silent. Kyle's jaw literally dropped. Cammy squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. And I just snapped, not by yelling, but by finally being completely done with it. I raised my glass, smiled real calm, and said, "Awesome. Then Dylan can start paying your mortgage too. I'm sure all those bartending shifts will cover it, when he's not busy stealing cars. Or maybe he can sell some of those actual structures you think are so impressive." Dad's face went purple. "How dare you talk to me like that after everything we've done for you?" I laughed right in his face. "Everything you've done for me? Name one thing." "Dad, one actual thing you've done for me that you didn't make me pay back with interest." Mom tried to jump in. "Mike, please, not here. We're your parents." I cut her off. "You're Dylan's parents. I'm just the ATM you use when he burns through his allowance." I set down my glass, thanked everyone else for coming, and walked out. Cammy followed me, but I told her I needed some space. I got in my truck and drove to this overlook outside town. I sat there for hours, thinking about all the BS I'd put up with. What made it worse was realizing that I wasn't even angry anymore. I was just done. Completely empty. Like someone had flipped a switch inside me and all my feelings about my family had just disappeared. That night, I decided I was done being the family punching bag. The next day, things took a turn for the worse, and my world began to shift in ways I could never have imagined. Stay tuned for part 3, where my clean break from my toxic family comes with consequences that were far worse than I expected. After that night, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't bracing for the next family drama. I wasn't getting constant comparisons to Dylan, nor was I waiting for another request for help that would be taken for granted. I wasn't constantly trying to prove myself to my parents. It was just me doing things for myself, putting myself first, and it felt incredible. The first few weeks of radio silence were strange. I kept expecting to feel guilty, expecting to cave and call them, but it never came. Instead, I felt peace. I'd never really understood the true meaning of peace until then. Every morning, I woke up feeling lighter, like the constant weight I'd been carrying around had finally disappeared. I threw myself into work. Kyle, my boss, was impressed with my renewed focus. I wasn't distracted by my family anymore. I was hitting all my targets, exceeding expectations, and bringing in more revenue than ever. After 3 months, the company rewarded me with a bonus, and for the first time, I actually got to keep it. Normally, that would have gone straight to helping my parents or Dylan, but this time, it was mine. I found a new apartment, an hour away from my parents' place. It was smaller, but in a much better area, and the security was top-notch. I furnished it exactly how I wanted. No second-hand stuff. No hand-me-downs. Everything the first picked out myself. The first thing I bought was a beautiful leather couch I'd been eyeing for years, but could never justify buying, while Dylan always needed loans. I set up a proper home office instead of the folding table I'd been using before. I hung art on the walls that I actually liked instead of the garage sale stuff Mom had always given me to make the place look nice. Cammy and I took a break for a bit after everything went down. She supported my decision but needed time to process the fact that I had cut off my entire family. Fair enough. We stayed in touch, though, getting coffee every couple of weeks and texting regularly. I also made new friends through work and joined an adult soccer league. I started hiking on weekends. For the first time in years, I was developing hobbies that weren't just escapes from family stress. I even started a side business designing small-scale landscapes for homeowners who couldn't afford full professional services. I created template plans that could implement themselves with plant lists and maintenance schedules. I was making an extra $1.50 to $2.0 a month, doing what I loved. And best of all, there was zero family drama attached to it. For the first time in my life, I was putting myself first, and it felt incredible. About 8 months after I cut ties with my family, Cammy told me that things had taken a turn for the worse for my parents. Dad had been laid off during the company's restructuring, and Mom's hours at the hospital had been cut back. They were living in a tiny apartment now. Dylan, still doing the same old stuff, still the golden child who could do no wrong in their eyes. Except now, they couldn't afford to keep bankrolling his lifestyle. The most satisfying part, Dylan had been forced to move back in with them. He couldn't afford rent anywhere, so the 3 of them were crammed into their 2-bedroom house. My cousin Casey, who had always been close to Dylan, told Cammy about it. She said the place looked like a frat house with Dylan's crap everywhere. Meanwhile, my dad sat in the kitchen, looking shell-shocked at what his life had become. All his years of enabling Dylan's behavior had led to this. Then the texts started coming from unknown numbers. Extended family members, worried about my parents. Your parents are struggling. They'd say. They might lose the house. My Aunt Linda even left me a voicemail saying, I know they weren't always fair to you, Mike, but they're still your parents. I didn't reply. I didn't engage. I just kept living my life running my cruise, making good money, and actually enjoying the peace I had built for myself. Then, one day, about a year after I cut off contact, I received an unexpected visitor at work. It was Casey, Dylan's wife or, as I would later find out, ex-wife. She looked tired. Her eyes had bags under them, but she was put together enough. She said she was in the area for a job interview and wanted to stop by. We went out for coffee, and without me even asking, she filled me in on the family situation. She told me that Dylan and she had split up 6 months ago after she found out he'd been cheating on her with multiple women. She had moved out and was starting over. Your parents are in bad shape, she said, stirring her coffee. The bank foreclosed on their house. They're living in this tiny apartment now. Your dad's been blacklisted in construction after that tip about the materials. Your mom's hours have been cut to part-time. They're broke. And Dylan? I asked, surprised at how little emotion I felt. Dylan is Dylan, she said with a dry laugh. Still partying. Still charming his way through life. Still living on their couch. Still their perfect son even as they lose everything helping him. Casey didn't ask me to reach out to them. She didn't try to guilt me. She just shared the information and let me decide what to do with it. I don't blame you for leaving, she said as we parted. I wish I'd done it sooner myself. 2 weeks later, I got an unexpected knock at my door on a Sunday morning. I checked the security camera and saw Dylan standing outside, looking like absolute garbage. Unshaven. Bags under his eyes. Cheap clothes hanging off him like he'd lost weight. I seriously considered not answering. But curiosity got the better of me. I opened the door just a crack. How'd you find me? I asked. Cammy told Mom where you work now. He admitted. Took me 3 weeks of watching the parking lot to follow you home. I stood in the doorway, blocking the entrance. Why would I let you in after you literally stalked me? Mom and Dad lost the house. He blurted out. Bank foreclosed last month. They're living in this crappy one-bedroom apartment now. Dad can't find work because of that tip someone sent his company about the materials. Mom's hours got cut even more. They've been helping me out for years, but now they can't anymore. And I'm screwed, man. I've got like $40,000 in debt. My car got repossessed. Casey left me. I've been sleeping on their couch. But there's barely room for them, let alone me. I looked at him, completely numb. Still waiting for the part where this is my problem. Dylan's face got red. I know I messed up. Okay. I was jealous. You always had your stuff together, and I didn't. But they're going to be homeless soon if they keep trying to help me. They're your parents, man. The confession of jealousy caught me off guard. But it wasn't enough. Not after everything. I stepped outside, closing and locking the door behind me. I got right in his face. No. They're your parents. They made that crystal clear for 32 freaking years. I'm just the gardener. Remember, the ATM. I'm the responsible one who was never good enough. Dylan's voice cracked. They talk about you all the time now. Dad says he was wrong. Mom cries about how she should have stood up for you more. Congratulations on the self-awareness, I said flatly. Better late than never. But you won't help after all those years they supported you. I noticed Dylan's hands were shaking. His eyes darting around. Like he couldn't focus on one thing. Classic signs of substance abuse. I didn't care. Tell them I said congratulations on their self-awareness, I said. Better late than never. Dylan hesitated before asking for $15,000 to help them avoid eviction. I looked him up and down. Get off my property before I call the cops. And don't come back, ever. He turned and walked away. Shoulders slumped in defeat. For the first time in my life, I felt nothing. No anger, no resentment, no satisfaction. Just emptiness. And that emptiness, that was the biggest victory I could have asked for. After I told Dylan to get off my property and not come back, I was left standing there, feeling a strange kind of peace. It was the kind of peace I had never felt before, like the last piece of the puzzle had finally clicked into place. My family had been a source of stress, manipulation, and emotional turmoil for my entire life. But in that moment, it was over. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel satisfaction. I just felt nothing, and that was exactly what I needed. I spent the next few days keeping to myself. I didn't feel the need to talk to anyone about what had just happened. And I definitely didn't want to get involved in their mess again. It was the first time I had ever fully cut ties with them. And I wasn't about to back down now. I had made my decision, and I was done. Then came the email from my mom. It was titled, "We're sorry." The message was long and full of excuses. They explained how they had realized too late how unfairly they had treated me. How watching Dylan spiral without their financial support had finally opened their eyes to how they had enabled him. How Dad had been diagnosed with depression after losing his job. How they were about to be evicted from their apartment because they couldn't keep up with bills. They ended the email with a direct request. We need $15,000 to keep our apartment and get back on our feet. We know we have no right to ask. But we have nowhere else to turn. Dylan told us about your new place. It sounds like you're doing well. Please, Mike. We're still your parents. I stared at the email for a long time. I could have easily written them a check. The promotion I had received had nearly doubled my salary, and I had a solid emergency fund. I could afford it without it hurting me much. But then I remembered everything. I remembered the years of being treated like I didn't matter. I remembered watching them bail Dylan out over and over, while I struggled on my own. I remembered Dad's face at my promotion party. The disgust in his voice when he talked about my career. I remembered how they'd ignored my hard work and supported Dylan's failures. I couldn't do it. Instead of writing them a check, I contacted my lawyer and had him draft a letter. I laid out my terms in a formal agreement, not just for my parents but for their entire financial situation. The terms were non-negotiable. The terms of financial assistance: I will pay $15.00 directly to their landlord and creditors, not to them personally. They will both sign a formal loan agreement with 8% interest. The same terms Dad gave me for my truck repair loan, with payments to begin in 6 months. Dylan will check into a 90-day rehabilitation program for his substance issues, with proof of completion required. They will both attend 6 sessions of financial counseling, with proof of completion required. They will sign a legal agreement stating they will not contact me outside of loan repayment matters for a period of no less than 2 years. I didn't expect them to sign it. I really didn't. But the next day, I got a call from my lawyer. He told me they had signed the contract. Dylan had checked into a 90-day program. The first payments to their landlord and creditors had been made. That's when I knew I had finally done something for myself. I had set boundaries, and for once, they were being held accountable. In the following months, my life began to change in ways I could never have anticipated. Cammie and I got engaged. We bought a house not fancy, but it was ours. We got a dog named Rex, who loved to ride in my truck, which I still took meticulous care of. I kept up with my work, continuing to exceed all expectations. And within 3 months, I had received another promotion. Now, I was overseeing operations for the entire county. For the first time in my life, I was living on my own terms, not defined by the expectations and manipulations of my family. But then, a year later, the truth about what had happened to my family came to light. Cammie told me that my parents' situation had gotten worse. They were living in an even smaller apartment now. And Dylan was still doing the same thing, squandering his life and living off their support. Casey, Dylan's ex-wife, told Cammie that Dylan had been fired from 3 more jobs in 6 months. The last one being for stealing inventory and selling it online. Dylan had totaled the Honda my parents had bought him and was now driving Mom's car, leaving her to take the bus to work. Dad had been forced to sell his prized fishing boat to cover some of Dylan's debts, but was telling everyone it was just time for an upgrade. The most satisfying part: Dylan had been forced to move back in with them. My parents were struggling, unable to afford their own lifestyle anymore. Casey said the place looked like a frat house. And my dad was shell-shocked by how much he had enabled Dylan. The texts from extended family started coming in again, asking if I would help. "Your parents are struggling," they said. "They might lose the house." I didn't respond. I didn't feel any guilt. I had moved on with my life, and I wasn't going to let them drag me back in. My cousin Tim reached out via email, saying, "I get why you went dark. I've seen how they treated you versus Dylan. But things are bad now. They're drowning in debt from years of bailing Dylan out." I didn't reply. I didn't want to open the door to that kind of emotional manipulation again. Then, one day, I got a visit at work. It was Dylan, looking even worse than before. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. He had bags under his eyes, cheap clothes hanging off him, and his whole demeanor was off. He asked if he could come in, but I refused. I was done. He begged me for money, said my parents were about to be homeless, that they needed $15.00 to avoid eviction. He told me he was screwed, with $40.00 in debt, his car repossessed, and his life falling apart. But I didn't care. I'd heard all the same stories from him before. He had taken everything my parents gave him and used it up. I'd watched him destroy his own life while they continued to enable him. I told him, calmly but firmly, "No, they're your parents, not mine. They've made that clear for 32 years. I'm just the gardener, the ATM. I'm done." He started to argue, but I cut him off. "Get off my property, or I'll call the cops. Don't come back here ever again." I watched him walk away, shoulders slumped in defeat. And for the first time in my life, I felt nothing. No anger, no resentment, just peaceful emptiness. 2 weeks later, I received an email from my mom. The subject line read, "We're sorry." It was filled with apologies, acknowledging everything they had done wrong, how they had taken me for granted, and how they were now suffering because of it. They asked for $15.00 to help them avoid eviction and get back on their feet. I could have helped. I had the money. But I remembered everything: the years of emotional manipulation, the favoritism toward Dylan, the constant comparisons, and the lack of appreciation for everything I had done. Instead of responding with money, I sent them a letter through my lawyer, outlining my terms for any kind of financial assistance. The same terms that I knew they would never accept. And they didn't. But that didn't matter anymore. Now, my life is unrecognizable from 2 years ago. Cami and I are happy, engaged, and planning our future together. I've moved into a new home, bought a new truck, and built a life for myself, one that doesn't involve my toxic family. I see my parents part of town from time to time. And I see people who look like them from a distance. But I don't feel anything anymore. No anger, no resentment, not even satisfaction at how things turned out. Just a deep, quiet peace. And for once in my life, that feels like the biggest victory of all.